PDT Achary, who's a former Lok Sabha Secretary General, has also joined us. Mr. Achary, thank you so much for joining. And how would you see the rejection of Meenakshi Rajan's nomination on the basis of a private complaint? It's not a criminal complaint, and her nomination is rejected. Now, the law says that Section 33A of the Representation of the People Act, it mandates disclosure by election candidates only in two situations. The first one is that if the candidate is accused of an offence punishable with imprisonment of 2 years or more in a pending case where charges have been framed by a competent court. That is the first situation. Second one is if the candidate has been convicted of an offence and sentenced to imprisonment for 1 year or more. Now, Section 223 of the BNSS lays down the procedure for a magistrate conducting a preliminary inquiry on a private complaint, on a private criminal complaint. Now, the provision states that no cognizance of an offence can be taken without giving the accused an opportunity to be heard. And the magistrate is required to examine the complainant and witnesses before deciding whether further proceedings are warranted. So how would you look at this Meenakshi Natarajan case? I mean, is it something which is very, very unprecedented in terms of the Rajya Sabha elections?
Well, as far as I could gather, this is an unprecedented kind of decision by the returning officer. Returning officer happens to be the legislature secretary, and he must know the law, and he must know what he should do with the nomination. Here, it is just a private complaint. It has not been taken cognizance of by the court. That is what I understand. And therefore, there is no requirement for her to enter that in the affidavit. And if there is no requirements, naturally, there is no ground on which the returning officer could have rejected it. Secondly, the law itself says that if the defect is not of a substantial character, the nomination shall not be rejected. It's a mandatory provision. That means unless the fault in the affidavit is of a substantial character, the nomination cannot be rejected by the returning officer. And the other legal provisions have been quoted by you. Now, all these things make it very clear that the ground on which the nomination has been rejected is spacious, and in fact, there was no ground for rejecting this nomination.
But what would you say to the conduct of the returning officer, Mr. Achary, that what kind of a wisdom he had when he actually rejected this case? Would he not have known the basis of the complaint which was made, which wasn't a criminal complaint? Did he not apply his mind enough, or did he deliberately do that? What can one say at the first glimpse of this particular incident?
Actually, a returning officer, he has to examine the affidavit and all that in detail. And then if an objection is raised that there are defects in the affidavit or defects in the nomination, then he has to make an inquiry. And then he should hear both sides. Then he has to make an inquiry, summary inquiry, of course. He can't make a detailed inquiry at that stage. A summary inquiry has to be done. And on the basis of that, he has to take a decision. I do not know what kind of summary inquiry he has done. Because if he had made an inquiry, he would have been able to know that this was just a complaint and it has not been taken cognizance of by the court. And therefore, there was no ground for rejecting it. So that is the position. Naturally, obviously.
Behavior also, Mr. Achary, because the same thing in Jharkhand, where Parimal Nathwani, who's the BJP candidate, who's known to be an Ambani employee, now he got 24 hours to correct his errors, whatever they were deemed, and his thing has been accepted, his nomination has been accepted. So which means that there is a certain political discrimination, a deliberate discrimination, which is done in the case of Meenakshi Natarajan, because she didn't get the time. Yesterday you saw how the Congress leaders, they protested at the gates of the Election Commission in Delhi, and even then they were not allowed. And after a long after they protested for a long time, then their application was admitted. Today also, no positive signs seem to be coming, except that Abhishek Manu Singhvi said that election commission should roll back now the decision which they have taken on Meenakshi Natarajan because it doesn't have a legal basis.
Normally, once the returning officer takes a decision, that is the final thing. And you cannot go to the court challenging the decision. That is what the law says. That is the final thing. But before taking a decision finally to reject and this nomination, he has to ensure that his decision is correct legally and in terms of the material available and all that. So he has a responsibility. It is not that when he finds on the face of it there is a problem or somebody has raised an objection, and on the basis of that he will immediately take a decision to reject it. That's not how it is. Returning officer has a great responsibility because at this stage, returning officer's decision is final. It cannot be revoked. Once it is decided, it cannot be revoked. The court will not intervene. And only at the stage of election petition. Now, the only option left for that lady is to file an election petition on the ground that her nomination has been wrongly rejected. That is the thing, but that will take time. So the returning officer has a great responsibility to ensure that his decision is correct in terms of law and also in terms of facts.
Achary, to the conduct of the returning officer, of course, is a very small fry when you look at the entire political setup and the administrative setup. Would you doubt his intentions? At the first glimpse, what does it look like? You doubt his intentions, that he's been asked to do it deliberately, or you find some other political game being played here?
Well, I can't say anything about that because I don't have facts. I don't have facts with me. But I am looking at what has actually been reported in the press. So on the basis of that, I have formed a certain view. And since I know the law, so I have, in fact, I've taken the view that it was not properly done. It was wrongly done by the returning officer. He should have given time to the other party to give proper evidence and all that. And then on the basis of that, he could have taken a decision. He should have taken a decision. That is my view. And since he has not...
You've seen the parliamentary proceedings for decades. And what is your feeling? That is this something really, really unprecedented, which has not been seen earlier in the history of the Rajya Sabha elections ever?
No, it has never happened. It has never happened because when Secretary Legislature is the returning officer for these Rajya Sabha elections, in fact, I was the returning officer for the presidential election. So I have some experience about that. That's how it is. And I had taken more than 2 hours, to deal with all the nominations which were given for the president. And so it's a very time-consuming and laborious kind of thing. But with meticulous care, you go through every nomination, every objection. You have to hear every objection. And then on the basis of that, on the basis of the law and on the basis of the precedents, you have to take a decision. That is it. And your decision should be correct. That is a responsibility cast on the returning officer. He can't reject things outright, guided by some political considerations or things like that. Well, I don't know what considerations weighed with this particular gentleman. I don't know.
Okay, so let me get in Mr. Achary, and if he can answer what Anilji has just asked. Yes, Mr. Achary?
There is a provision for summary inquiry by the returning officer. That is specifically mentioned in the law. Summary inquiry. Doesn't have to do a very elaborate kind of inquiry. When a dispute arises, when one party makes an allegation and the other party opposes it, rejects it. So the returning officer has to make an inquiry. But it cannot be just a formal inquiry. It cannot be just a namesake kind of inquiry, but he has to find out the facts. So if only this returning officer had tried to honestly find out the facts about this, then he would have been able to know that there is no such serious case or criminal case pending against her. And what she said in this affidavit was correct, substantially correct. Now, as I said in the beginning, that the law says that if the defect is not of a substantial character, suppose she were involved in some serious criminal case which she concealed from the affidavit. In that case, it is a defect of substantial character. There can be many other cases. In that case, certainly the returning officer has a justification for rejecting it. But in this case, the defect or whatever they have found out is not of a substantial character. That is the thing. So if it is not of a substantial character, then the returning officer cannot reject it. Now, who will decide whether it is a defect of substantial character? Certainly, it is the returning officer. He has to decide that. But then the law guides him. So he has to take a proper, fair view of things. That is the thing. He cannot say that, no, it is a defect of substantial character. That won't do. That won't do. He has to take a reasonable stand, a fair kind of position on this. That is what is missing here in this particular case.